Welcome to Bedtime Noir. Tonight, we invite you into the quiet corners of the Briarwood Hotel, a place where some rooms never forget. As the rain falls and the city sleeps, listen closely to the story of a man, a candle, and a memory that wouldn't stay buried. Get comfortable and drift into the mystery of a candle in room 214. It was the kind of rain that didn't fall. It just lingered in the air like a secret the sky was too tired to keep. Gray mist clung to the windows of the old Briarwood Hotel, curling around the panes like smoke. The kind of place people stayed when they didn't want to be found or couldn't afford to be remembered. Cal Morgan had been the night manager there for 17 years. Not because he liked the hours, he didn't, but because the night didn't ask questions. It let him drift through time unnoticed, folding bed sheets and silence in equal measure. The Briarwood was 5 stories tall, not counting the basement, and it creaked like it missed someone. Half the rooms were empty more often than not. The carpets were threadbare in places, worn thin by decades of travelers who never stayed long enough to leave their names in anything but the registry. The wallpaper in the lobby peeled at the edges like it wanted to slip off and vanish. But the building had a memory to it, and Cal had learned to respect that. In those 17 years, he'd seen the hotel breathe through seasons. Winters when the radiators clanged like ghosts in chains, and summers when the air conditioning wheezed and gave up by July. He'd watched paint fade and would warp, watched the city change outside while the Briarwood remained stubbornly itself. Guests came seeking anonymity or simply a cheap bed, and the hotel offered both without judgment. There was Mrs. Chun, who stayed every December and left origami cranes on the windowsill. A traveling salesman named Marcus who booked room 318 monthly and always requested extra towels he never used. The young woman who checked in under different names but always asked for the same room, 402, and spent her nights typing on an old manual typewriter until dawn. Cal knew them all by their habits rather than their faces. The hotel taught you to see people in fragments, the way they walked the halls, the sounds they made through thin walls, the things they left behind. He kept a ledger by the desk, a real one, leather-bound and old enough to smell like forgotten things. Guests came and went, names scribbled in looping handwriting, sometimes fake, sometimes drunk, sometimes both. Room keys hung on little brass hooks behind the counter, heavy, old-fashioned ones with red plastic numbers dangling from them. All except one, room 214. Its key hadn't been there for almost 2 years. It wasn't missing, not exactly. Cal kept it in a drawer beneath the register. But he didn't offer it to guests. Not anymore. Room 214 wasn't booked. Not since the winter of 23. But sometimes, late at night, Cal would glance up from his crossword or half-finished cup of black coffee and see a faint glow from under its door. The housekeeper swore the room stayed clean. No signs of entry. No fingerprints. Just dust and the faintest scent of wax. A candle. Always a candle. Soft light flickering under the door, as if someone had stepped in for just a moment, lit it, and left. Cal didn't believe in ghosts. Not exactly, but he believed in places that remembered things. In the Briarwood, it remembered everything. He learned this gradually, the way you learn the rhythm of a city or the taste of well water. The hotel held onto moments like a pressed flower holds onto summer. Room 107 still smelled faintly of cigarettes, though smoking had been banned for a decade, ever since the man in the pinstripe suit had chain-smoked Marlboros while writing what he claimed was a suicide note. He'd checked out the next morning, leaving behind only ash and the lingering scent of his desperation. Room 341 stayed cold, even in summer, ever since the night a young mother had sat by the window, watching for a car that never came. She'd waited until sunrise, then left without a word. The radiator hadn't worked properly since. In room 214. Room 214 remembered Eleanor. That night started like most others. A couple checked in just after 10, soaked to the bone, arguing over something that didn't matter. The woman clutched a suitcase like it held her entire life, while the man counted crumpled bills with the careful attention of someone who'd counted them many times before. Room 306. Cal gave him a smile that didn't reach his eyes and slid the key across the counter. Their voices trailed off as they disappeared into the hallway, their argument dissolving into the hotel's familiar chorus of settling wood and humming pipes. Midnight came. The storm drifted in harder, tapping at the lobby windows with nervous fingers. Wind howled faintly through the cracks in the frame, carrying with it the scent of wet pavement and distant promises. Cal made himself a fresh cup of coffee, black, bitter, and a few hours too late for comfort, then returned to his usual post behind the front desk. The lobby was quiet, as usual. A faded armchair sat near the front window, its upholstery torn at the seam, where countless guests had picked at it while waiting for cabs that ran late or lovers who never showed. An old floor lamp buzzed like it had something to say, but didn't know how. The Persian rug beneath the coffee table had once been burgundy, but years of traffic had worn it to the color of old wine. He leaned back in his creaky chair and flipped open the hotel's logbook, half out of boredom, half out of habit. He liked seeing the names. It made him feel like he wasn't the only one awake in the city, like somewhere beyond these walls, people were living lives that mattered. Most names meant nothing. A Mr. Holloway from Detroit who'd paid in cash and left no forwarding address. A Ms. L. Ramirez who'd asked for a room that faced away from the street. A man who signed only as K. And spoke in whispers to someone on the phone until 3 in the morning. Sometimes they wrote in cursive, sometimes all caps. Every so often, he saw someone write their name so carefully, like they wanted to be remembered by the book itself. That's when he noticed it. A smell. Faint. Familiar. Like melted wax and something sweeter beneath. Lavender, maybe. The kind of scent that clings to your coat long after you've left the room where it lived. He stood up slowly. His knees popped, reminding him that he wasn't young anymore, that 17 years of night shifts had settled into his bones like sediment. He moved to the security monitor, an old black and white screen hooked to a series of grainy hallway cameras that showed everything in shades of gray and shadow. He cycled through them. Ground floor, empty except for the vending machine's eternal hum. Third floor, the couple from earlier pacing like caged animals in their small room. Second floor west wing. There it was. A faint light from beneath the door of room 214. Again, Cal stared for a moment, rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. Still there. A soft glow that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat made of light. He considered calling someone, but who? The cops wouldn't come over a candle. Rita would just shrug and tell him to handle it himself. And the owner, Mr. Valdez, didn't care about anything beyond the monthly rent checks, so long as the building didn't burn down and the complaints stayed manageable. Which they did. The Briarwood's guests weren't the complaining type. He walked to the back office, opened the drawer under the register, and pulled out the key to room 214. The brass felt cool in his hand, heavier than it should have been. The red plastic tag hung from it like a drop of blood. He stood there for a moment, key in hand, staring at it like it might explain something. But it didn't. It never had. The clock on the wall ticked past 12:30. Outside, the rain continued its patient work, washing the city clean one drop at a time. The hallway of the second floor stretched long and narrow, lined with doors that held 1,000 secrets. A single bulb flickered overhead, buzzing softly like it had a secret of its own. His footsteps sank into the faded green carpet, each step muffled by decades of wear. Room 214 was at the far end, past the ice machine that hadn't worked in 5 years and the painting of a lighthouse that hung slightly crooked no matter how many times Cal straightened it. The door looked like every other door, scuffed at the bottom where suitcases had bumped against it, paint peeling at the corners like old sunburn. But it had weight to it. Not physical exactly, just weight. He stopped in front of it. Sure enough, a soft, golden light danced beneath the doorframe. No sounds, no shadows moving beyond the thin line of illumination. Just the gentle flicker of flame against darkness. Cal hesitated. His fingers hovered over the knob, and for a moment he wondered if he was making a mistake. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. Some lights, once acknowledged, refused to be extinguished. Then he slid in the key. The lock gave a reluctant click, the sound echoing in the empty hallway like a period at the end of a sentence. The door opened slowly, creaking just enough to make the hairs on his neck rise. The room was empty. No one inside. Nothing out of place. The bed was made with hospital corners, the way Eleanor used to make it when she stayed here. The curtains drawn against the night, their fabric the color of old champagne. Dust floated in the air like slow-motion snow, caught in the candlelight that painted everything in shades of amber and shadow. And in the center of the dresser, a single white candle, flickering gently, almost as if it had been expecting him. Cal stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The candlelight painted soft shadows on the walls, and suddenly the room felt smaller, more intimate. It smelled exactly as he remembered. Wax and lavender. Calm. Familiar. Like coming home to a place you'd never been sure you belonged. He reached out to snuff it, then stopped. There beside it was something new, an envelope, unsealed, resting neatly beneath the candle holder. His name written on the front in delicate script that made his breath catch. Calvin. He hadn't heard anyone call him that in years. Not since. His throat tightened, though he wasn't sure why. The name sounded different in his head, softer somehow, like it was being spoken by someone who remembered when it meant something. He picked up the envelope. The paper felt thick, expensive, the kind of stationery you buy when words matter more than money. The ink was slightly faded, as if it had been written long ago and left to wait. The handwriting neat, too neat, like someone had taken their time, like they hadn't written anything in a very long time and wanted to get it right. He slid the letter free and unfolded it. It read, Calvin, I hope this finds you well, or as well as you let yourself be. I never blamed you, not truly, but I did wait. And I wanted you to know I never left. Not really. Some rooms remember love. Others remember sorrow. Room 214 remembers both. I left something here, and I think it's time you found it. Yours, E. Cal read the letter twice. Then again. Each time, the words seemed to settle deeper into his chest, like stones dropping into still water. His hand trembled just slightly. E. Eleanor. He hadn't thought about her in a long time. Not since he'd trained himself not to think about her. Not since the mornings when he'd wake up and reach for someone who wasn't there. Or the evenings when he'd set the table for two out of habit and then have to put away the extra plate. No. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, the candle casting flickers across the wall like old memories projected on a screen. The mattress gave slightly under his weight. He remembered this bed. Remembered sitting on it just like this 12 years ago while Eleanor packed her things. She'd moved slowly, deliberately, like she was trying to memorize each item before placing it in her suitcase. A blue sweater, a book of poetry with pages soft from reading, a small music box that played something he'd never recognized. He'd watch her pack, and neither of them had said what they both knew, that she wasn't coming back. He glanced around the room, half expecting the furniture to rearrange itself or the air to speak her name. But it didn't. The silence held, patient and complete. Only the flame moved. The room felt smaller somehow, closer, like the walls had drawn together while he wasn't looking, creating a space just large enough for memory and regret. He leaned back on his palms and stared at the ceiling. There was a faint crack in the plaster, spreading from the light fixture like a river delta. He'd never noticed it before. It curved like a crooked smile, or maybe a scar. Outside, the rain softened into a hush, like a lullaby with no words. The city settled into its late-night rhythm. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, the sound of lives continuing in the darkness. Inside, room 214 breathed in silence. Something had begun to wake, and Cal wasn't sure if he was ready, but he stayed anyway, sitting in the candlelight, letting the past wash over him like rain on a window. Because sometimes, he thought, the only way through the darkness is to stop running from it. The candle burned lower, wax pooling at its base, and still he sat, waiting. The next morning, Cal called in sick. He wasn't sick, not in any way you could write down on a medical form, but something about the letter had settled in his chest like wet concrete. Heavy, inescapable, the kind of weight that made every breath feel deliberate. He sat at his kitchen table with the envelope in front of him, untouched since last night. He hadn't read it again. Didn't need to. The words were stuck in his head like a song from a long drive home, playing on repeat whether he wanted them to or not. Some rooms remember love. Others remember sorrow. His apartment was small, clean, and empty in the way that happens when you stop expecting company. A single coffee mug in the sink. Yesterday's newspaper folded to the crossword, half finished. The silence was different here. Not the expectant quiet of room 214, but the flat, dead quiet of a life lived in lowercase. He made coffee and didn't drink it. Opened a newspaper and didn't read it. Stood at the window and watched the city wake up without him. People hurrying to jobs and appointments and lives that mattered to someone. He hadn't heard from Eleanor, in nearly 12 years. Not since she left without a goodbye. No note. No knock on his door. No phone call in the middle of the night when the regret got too heavy to carry alone. Just an empty room and a silence that stayed too long, like a guest who didn't know when to leave. They hadn't been married. Not officially, but they'd lived like it, in a way that happens when two people find each other in the middle of their own darkness and decide to be less alone together. Mornings filled with shared newspapers and mismatched mugs. Arguments over jazz records that lasted until one of them laughed and the other remembered why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Afternoons spent in Meridian Park when neither of them could sleep, watching strangers live their lives and making up stories about where they were going. She loved the sound of the rain, said it made the world feel smaller and more manageable. He always thought it sounded better when she was around, like she knew how to listen to it properly. Eleanor had worked at the art museum downtown, in the conservation lab where she spent her days bringing old paintings back to life. She'd come home with stories about the colors hidden beneath centuries of dust, the way a single brushstroke could reveal an artist's entire heart. Her hands always smelled faintly of turpentine and possibility. She'd started staying at the Briarwood before they moved in together, back when her apartment was being renovated and she needed somewhere cheap and quiet. Room 214. She'd chosen it because it faced east toward the part of the city where the morning light looked like hope. "I like that room," she told him once, lying in his bed with her head on his chest. "It feels like it's waiting for something beautiful to happen." And then, one day, she was gone. Just like that. Kel never asked why. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe he was afraid the answer would be something he couldn't fix, or worse, something he'd caused without realizing it. But he remembered she'd once stayed in room 214, just for a few nights before they lived together. She liked that room, said it faced the city in a way that made it feel less lonely. Now it was as if the room had been holding on to her all this time, keeping her close in the only way it knew how. Around noon, Kel put on his coat and walked back to the Briarwood. The day was gray and soft, the kind of weather that made everything look like a watercolor painting left in the rain. He didn't tell anyone he was coming in. He just wanted to look around, to see if the hotel felt different in daylight, if the mystery of room 214 would dissolve under the practical glare of afternoon. The lobby was quiet, except for the faint buzz of the vending machine by the wall and the distant murmur of daytime television from the small office behind the desk. He passed Rita, the morning clerk, who barely looked up from her Sudoku. She was in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of efficiency that came from years of dealing with people who couldn't find their keys. "You're early," she said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," Cal replied, which was true enough. She didn't ask why he was there. That was the thing about working nights. You could ghost through the day like you didn't belong to it, and people just accepted that your schedule was a mystery they didn't need to solve. He climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. The building felt different during the day, less mysterious, more tired. Sunlight streamed through the windows, revealing dust motes and faded wallpaper and all the small ways the hotel showed its age. The steps creaked beneath his feet, like the old building was whispering to him again. Each floor had its own personality. The ground floor smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee. The second floor held the lingering scent of 100 different perfumes and colognes. The third floor always felt slightly warmer than the rest. When he reached the second floor, he hesitated. His hand brushed the wall as he walked down the hallway, fingertips trailing over the peeling wallpaper with its pattern of faded roses. The hallway stretched before him, doors on either side like a row of closed books. Room 214 looked unchanged. No flickering light this time. No scent of lavender drifting from beneath the door. Just a closed door and the faint memory of candle wax that might have been imagination. He didn't unlock it. Not yet. Instead, he walked past it and into the maintenance closet at the end of the hall. He flicked on the bare bulb and sifted through old tools, replacement bulbs, a few boxes of brittle files that documented decades of repairs and renovations. Behind a row of paint cans, their labels so faded they looked like artifact from another century, he found what he was looking for. The Briarwood's original guest logs, thick with dust and heavy with the weight of forgotten names. He carried them to the basement, to the little room that passed as an office. It smelled like old metal and dry paper, with a single window that looked out onto the alley where delivery trucks rumbled past at all hours. The fluorescent light flickered intermittently, casting everything in harsh, uncertain shadows. There, at a desk that had seen better decades, he started flipping through the logs. Years of names. Guests who stayed for a night and left no impression. Some who overstayed and vanished without paying their bills. Others who returned like ghosts every winter, drawn back by something they couldn't name. He saw patterns in the pages. The businessman who booked room 318 every month for 3 years, then suddenly stopped. The woman who always asked for a room on the 4th floor and left origami birds on the windowsill. The couple who came every anniversary and fought so loudly that other guests complained. Until one year they stopped coming and the hotel felt quieter somehow. When he reached the log from 2013, his hand stopped. There it was. Eleanor Hughes. Checked in January 3rd. Room 214. Stayed 3 nights. The handwriting was different from hers. Probably Rita's predecessor, Mrs. Kowalski, who'd worked mornings for 30 years before retiring to Florida. But seeing Eleanor's name in the official record made it real in a way that memory couldn't quite manage. He turned the page. That familiar looping script again. Eleanor's own handwriting in the checkout column. Checked out. No date. Just a blank space. A missing line. An unfinished sentence. He flipped ahead, pages and pages of guests who came and went like seasons. But room 214 never showed up again under her name. It was as if she'd simply vanished from the record, leaving behind only that empty space where her departure should have been documented. His fingers slowed as he studied the page. The blank space was odd, too deliberate. Someone had started to write and then stopped. There was even a faint indentation from the pen, as if the thought had died mid-stroke. You could see where the pen had touched the paper, then lifted away before forming any letters. Cal sat back in the old metal chair, the log spread out in front of him like a map of human transience, and exhaled slowly. It was possible, he realized. Possible that she'd never officially checked out. Possible that she'd packed her things and left without stopping at the desk, without completing the ritual of departure. Possible that room 214 had been waiting for her to return ever since. But why? Why leave without a word? Why abandon not just him, but the careful bureaucracy of hotel life itself? He flipped back to the page with her name and stared at it for a long time. The ink had faded slightly, but the letters were still clear. Eleanor Hughes, room 214, a story with no ending. Or maybe, he thought, a story that was just beginning. That night, Cal returned to room 214. He waited until after midnight, when the halls were empty and the city had gone quiet in that heavy way only cities can. The kind of quiet that feels crowded with things unsaid, like a theater just before the curtain rises. The hotel felt different at night, more alive somehow. The walls seemed to breathe with the memory of all the lives they contained, all the secrets they'd kept. The carpet muffled his footsteps, but he could hear the building settling around him, pipes sighing in the walls, floorboards creaking in rooms where no one was supposed to be walking. He stood in front of the door for a long time, key in hand. Then he unlocked it. The room looked just as it had the night before. Still, quiet. The candle was gone now, but the brass candle holder remained on the dresser, a small pool of hardened wax at its base. No envelope, just a hint of lavender still clinging to the air, as though the scent itself was reluctant to leave. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. He sat on the bed again. His knees complained, but he ignored them. The mattress held the same slight depression from the night before, as if it remembered the weight of his body, the burden of his waiting. The walls were bare except for a single painting, a landscape of mountains and sky that looked like it had been hanging there since the hotel opened. The furniture hadn't changed. A dresser with a mirror that reflected everything slightly darker than it should, a chair by the window that faced the city like a silent observer, a nightstand with a lamp that cast shadows in all the wrong places. But something had shifted. The air felt different, expectant. He turned to the nightstand drawer and opened it. Empty, except for the impression left by whatever had been there before. Then the dresser, just a Gideon Bible, dusty and unread, its pages yellowed with age. He opened it randomly and saw that someone had underlined a passage in pencil. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. The handwriting was Eleanor's. He ran his hands along the frame of the bed, checking for anything out of place. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that he'd know it if he found it. His fingers traced the wood grain, searching for hidden drawers or secret compartments, the kind of thing that existed in mystery novels but not in real life. He stood, paced. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, telling stories in their own wooden language. He opened the closet, expecting to find nothing but hangers and the smell of old wood. That's when he saw it, taped to the back of the closet wall, barely visible behind a hanging bathrobe that no guest would have left behind. A small photograph. He peeled it off carefully, as if it might crumble at his touch. It was black and white, faded at the edges like a memory that had been handled too many times. A snapshot of the hotel rooftop, 2 chairs positioned to face the city. A woman in one of them, smiling at the camera with the kind of expression that suggested she was laughing at something just outside the frame. Her hair was pulled back in the way Eleanor used to do when she was trying not to cry. A steaming mug sat on the small table between the chairs. Rain blurred the skyline behind her, turning the city into an impressionist painting. Cal felt his throat close. He recognized the woman, of course. But more than that, he recognized the moment. The afternoon they'd spent on the roof, talking about everything and nothing while the storm gathered around them. He'd forgotten about the photograph until now, forgotten that she'd even brought a camera. He turned the photo over. In pencil, in small, neat handwriting that made his chest tight. You never did take a picture of us, so I left this for you. Lovey. The words were faded but legible, written in the same careful script as the letter. He could imagine her here, in this room, taping the photograph to the wall like a message in a bottle, waiting for him to find it. He sat down on the edge of the bed again and stared at the photo for a long while. The woman in the picture looked happy. Not forced happy, not polite happy, but genuinely content in the way that happens when you're exactly where you want to be, with exactly the person you want to be with. He'd forgotten how she looked when she was happy. Outside, the city hummed with its midnight song. Distant sirens, the whisper of late-night traffic, the sound of other people's lives continuing in the darkness. But inside room 214, time felt suspended, like a held breath waiting to be released. The photograph was warm in his hands, as if it had been waiting for him all this time. Time passed. The candle didn't return the next night, or the night after that, but Cal did. Each night, he returned to room 214. Sometimes he sat quietly, letting the silence wash over him like water. Other times he spoke aloud, unsure if anyone or anything was listening but needing to fill the space with words. He told her about the guests, the ones who argued behind thin walls, the ones who sang in the shower, the ones who left without paying their bills. He talked about the weather, the way autumn was settling into the city like a comfortable old coat. He mentioned the old jazz records he still played in the back office, the ones she'd given him for his birthday 3 years before she left. He told her about Mrs. Chun, who still came every December and still left origami cranes on the windowsill. About Marcus, the traveling salesman who'd started bringing his grandson on business trips. About the young woman with the typewriter who'd finally finished her novel and moved to Portland. He told her about the small changes to the hotel. The new carpet in the lobby, the broken elevator that finally got fixed, the way the city looked different from the front windows now that they'd built a parking garage across the street. But mostly, he told her he was sorry. Not for anything he'd done, but for what he hadn't done. For not going after her. For not asking questions. For pretending it didn't matter when she vanished like mist in the morning. For letting pride and fear and the simple inertia of loneliness keep him from trying to find her. Sometimes, he left the door open when he went. Sometimes, he brought a candle from the supply closet and left it burning on the dresser. He never saw her, but he stopped feeling alone in that room. The space began to feel lived in, somehow. Not haunted exactly, but inhabited, as if the walls were absorbing their conversations, holding onto them like a library holds onto books. And the scent of lavender always lingered, faint, like the end of a melody you almost remember, but persistent enough to make the room feel like home. Then one night, a week after he found the photograph, he had a dream. In it, the hotel was empty. Not just quiet, completely vacant. Every room standing open, their doors yawning like mouths waiting to speak. The halls echoed with his footsteps, and the silence was so complete it felt like a physical presence. He walked through them, one by one, searching for something he couldn't name. Each room told a story. Furniture arranged just so, personal belongings left behind, the lingering scent of lives that had moved on. But all of them were empty, waiting, until he reached the roof. It was raining gently, the kind of rain that doesn't rush or threaten, just falls like a benediction. 2 chairs sat side by side, facing the city that spread out below like a circuit board of light and shadow. She was there, not younger, not older, just as she was. She looked at him, but didn't speak, just smiled, the kind of smile that forgave everything without saying a word. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she wore the blue sweater he remembered, the one that made her eyes look like deep water. The city sparkled beneath them, rain-washed and clean. He could see the whole world from up there, the rivers of headlights, the windows lit with other people's lives, the way the darkness held it all like a cupped hand. When he sat beside her, the rain stopped falling. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them was different from the silence in room 214. Not empty, but full, complete, like a question that had finally found its answer. She reached for his hand, and her fingers were warm, real. And in the dream, he understood that some things couldn't be fixed, only forgiven. That love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just changes shape, becomes something that can exist in the spaces between breath and heartbeat, in the pause between lightning and thunder. When he woke, the understanding stayed with him. Cal woke with a start. His apartment was quiet, filled with the gray light of dawn. The dream clung to him like morning mist, vivid and strange, and more real than reality itself. But the scent of lavender hung in the air, unmistakable. He rose, dressed without thinking, and walked to the Briarwood before sunrise. The streets were empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional early commuter, people who belonged to the margins of the day. The hotel was quiet. Rita wouldn't arrive for another hour, and the night seemed to be holding its breath. Room 214 was silent, but on the front desk, beside the guest ledger, was the room key. He hadn't put it there. It just appeared, like it had been returned by invisible hands. The brass gleamed in the lobby's dim light, and the red plastic tag caught the reflection of the street lamps outside. It looked like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there, like the past 2 years of hiding in the drawer had been nothing but a misunderstanding. Cal picked up the key and turned it over in his palm. It was warm, as if someone had been holding it. He looked at the guest ledger, and his breath caught. A new entry had appeared overnight, written in the same careful script as the letter, the same graceful handwriting that had underlined the passage in the Bible. Eleanor Hughes, room 214. Check out March 3rd. Today's date. He ran his fingers over the words. They were real, ink on paper, but no one had written them. Not physically, not anyone living, anyway. He didn't feel afraid. If anything, he felt lighter, like a weight he'd been carrying for 12 years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The story was complete now. The record was whole. Eleanor Hughes had checked out of room 214, and the hotel's books were balanced once more. But that didn't mean she was gone. Some departures, he realized, were just another way of arriving. The morning air was soft, barely stirring the leaves at the street's edge. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Cal walked slowly to the Briarwood, coffee in hand, scarf wrapped around his neck, something he hadn't worn in years. The hotel looked the same. Bricks chipped, neon sign buzzing half-lit, windows hiding secrets. But it felt different, settled, as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The lobby was empty, not just of people, but in a quiet way that pressed on the walls, like the moment after a funeral when everything feels sacred. The guest ledger lay open behind the desk, not how he'd left it. And on the hook, room 214's key gleamed. It hadn't hung there in 2 years. Now it belonged. Tracing Eleanor's name in her careful script, he felt the ink's slight indent in the page, as if the words were pressed into memory itself. Later that day, Cal returned to room 214 for the last time. He knocked once, then opened the door. Sunlight poured through the curtains, dust motes drifting slowly in the warm light. The bed was made neatly, the closet door ajar. On the dresser sat the photograph, once black and white, now softened with vintage color. The woman wore a yellow scarf, her smile warm, eyes bright green. The city behind her no longer blurred, but held details. Red bricks, green awnings, the afternoon sun catching windows like mirrors of sky. On the back, a message in delicate pencil. You didn't forget me. Thank you for coming back. Love always, E. A tightness caught Cal's throat as a real smile spread across his face, the first in years. That evening, he climbed to the rooftop. Though not open to guests, he had the keys, trusted by the building's owner to hold its secrets. The air smelled of rain and promise, the city lights blinking on like stars being born. He pulled 2 chairs side by side, just like in the photograph, and sat. He didn't expect Eleanor to appear. Not like a ghost from a movie, but the space between the chairs felt full, with her presence, or maybe the memory of it. Pulling out the photo again, he studied her peaceful smile. I'm sorry it took me so long, he said softly, voice carrying across the quiet rooftop. I should have come looking for you. The city hummed beneath him, distant traffic, late-night conversations, a church bell chiming. He sat until stars filled the sky, feeling something inside shift, the first breath of healing after holding it too long. When he stood, he left the second chair empty, just in case. Thank you for joining us tonight in the silence between shadows. We hope the story of room 214 brought you peace, mystery, and maybe a little warmth in the quiet hours. If you enjoyed this bedtime noir tale, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who loves slow burn mysteries, and subscribing for more sleep-friendly crime stories just like this one. Until next time, stay curious and sleep well.